Have you ever stopped to think about how something as simple as, say, the spices in your kitchen could actually start wars or completely change the world? Well, that's exactly the story we're going to get into. We're going to see how Europe's craving for new flavors kicked off a whole new chapter in human history. Okay, so take a look at this. You've probably got some of the stuff in your kitchen right now, right? Pepper, cinnamon, maybe some nutmeg. They're just simple spices. But here's the crazy part. Hundreds of years ago, these little things were worth more than their weight in gold. Yeah, no joke. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? So that's the big question. Why? Why on earth were these spices so incredibly valuable? Well, the answer to that question is this amazing story that's full of daring explorers, massive wars, and the rise of super powerful cities. It's a story of how a simple taste for something new ended up changing, well, pretty much everything. So our story really kicks off when Europe starts looking past its own backyard, when it starts getting curious and developing a real taste for the faraway lands of the East. Meet Marco Polo. He was a merchant from Venice, Italy, and he was one of the very first Europeans to travel all the way to a place they called Cathay. We, of course, know it as China today. His journey was unbelievably long and dangerous, and when he finally got back, the stories he told, they just blew everyone's minds. You know, there's this famous legend about him. It goes that to prove his wild stories were true, he'd invite people over for dinner and then, right at the table, just casually pull handfuls of jewels out of his pockets. Now, who knows if that actually happened, but the story shows you what Europeans were thinking, that the East was this place of just unbelievable, unimaginable wealth. So you have people like Marco Polo sparking these dreams of riches in the East. But what really opened the floodgates for trade? You might be surprised. It wasn't just merchants looking for profit. It was soldiers going to war. These were called the Crusades. For about 200 years, Christian armies from Europe marched to the Middle East to fight Muslim armies over a region they called the Holy Land. These were really long, really brutal wars, but they had a totally unexpected side effect. Check out these two maps. The one on the left shows the paths soldiers took for the Crusades. The one on the right? Those are the main trade routes that merchants started using. See how similar they look? The paths that were carved out for war became the highways for business. And this is the key takeaway here. The Crusades had two huge consequences for Europe. First, the soldiers and travelers saw this more advanced Muslim civilization and brought back these incredible new ideas in science, math, and medicine. And second, they got a taste for new stuff, silks, exotic fruits, and especially those amazing spices. They went home wanting more, a lot more. So how did they get more? Well, that leads us right to one of the most famous trade networks in all of history, the Silk Road. Now, the thing about the Silk Road is, it wasn't actually one single road. You can see here it was this huge, sprawling network of paths and routes that stretched for thousands and thousands of kilometers, connecting Europe all the way to China. It was the main artery for goods and ideas flowing between these two parts of the world. And what was moving along these routes? Well, first up, spices. You have to remember, this was a time before refrigerators. Food was often pretty bland, maybe even going bad, and spices could make anything taste better. Then you had salt, which was a huge deal. It wasn't just for flavor. Salt was one of the only ways people had to preserve meat and fish to get them through the long winters. It was crucial for survival. And there was also grain. Think about it. If the crops failed where you lived, trade could bring in grain from somewhere else. That could literally be the difference between life and death for your whole town. And to give you an idea of just how important all this was, get this. At one point, a bag of pepper was literally worth more than a bag of gold of the exact same weight. It was the ultimate luxury good. So all this trade, all this money, someone had to control it, right? And that brings us to the next big part of our story, the rise of these unbelievably rich and powerful cities, especially in Italy.
See, back then, Italy wasn't one unified country like it is today. It was made up of a bunch of city-states. The easiest way to think of a city-state is like its own tiny little country, with one big city calling all the shots for itself and all the farms and villages surrounding it.
And this right here is the perfect example, Florence. It was one of the most powerful and wealthy city-states in all of Italy. You can just see it was a huge, bustling hub of activity, money, and power, all of it built on the back of trade and business. So why Italy? Out of all of Europe, why did these cities get so rich? Well, a huge part of the answer is just geography. I mean, look at these maps. Italy is a peninsula that sticks right out into the Mediterranean Sea. This location made it the perfect middleman, the perfect gateway between the rest of Europe and all those rich port cities in the east. So it really boils down to 4 main reasons why Italy hit the jackpot. First, like we just saw, its geography was perfect. Second, it had great weather, which meant ships could sail and trade pretty much all year round. Third, its cities were independent and laser-focused on business, not like other kingdoms that were run by a single king. And finally, and this is important, even the rich nobles in Italy were all about business and making money, not just sitting on their land. Okay, so this whole mix, the new stuff, the new money, the new ideas, it all added up to have this massive impact that went way beyond just business. It was actually about to change the world. All right, let's do a quick recap of how we got here. Step 1, the Crusades create this huge demand in Europe for Eastern goods. Step 2, merchants travel along routes like the Silk Road to meet that demand. Step 3, the Italian city-states, thanks to their perfect location, get control of all this trade. And step 4, that control makes them incredibly rich and powerful. Simple as that. And here it is, the biggest takeaway of all. This explosion of wealth, this flood of new ideas from the East, it all helped kickstart one of the most important periods in European history, the Renaissance. It was this incredible time of amazing art, incredible science, and totally new ways of thinking. All of it funded and fueled by the money and knowledge that came from trade. So I'll leave you with this one final thought. Think back to the Silk Road. Yeah, merchants were trading spices and silk, but they were also sharing stories, science, art, and beliefs. So what do you think is ultimately more valuable when different cultures connect? The physical stuff they trade, or the brand new ideas they end up sharing with each other? Something to think about.
Okay, so picture this. A dinner party.
Right.
The year is, around 1295? We're in Venice, Italy.
A very wealthy, very beautiful city. But the people at this particular party are, let's just say they're confused.
They're looking at the 3 hosts, Marco, Niccolo, and Marco Polo.
Like they've just seen ghosts.
Well, they basically were ghosts, right?
To be fair, yeah. The Polos have been gone for 24 years. I mean, no contact, no letters, no nothing. Everyone just assumed they were dead.
And they looked pretty rough. The sources say they were wearing these, thick Tartar-style coats.
And weird pointy straw hats. They definitely didn't look like sophisticated Venetian merchants anymore.
Not at all. They look like strangers.
Yeah.
And you could just imagine the guests whispering, are these really the Polos or is this some kind of scam?
And that's the moment. That's when Marco Polo decides to just end the conversation.
He stands up, grabs a knife, and starts ripping open the seams of his old, dirty coat.
Such a great cinematic moment. You can almost hear the silence in the room and just the sound of fabric tearing.
Exactly. And out of the lining of this coat, just a cascade of rubies, emeralds, diamonds.
Sapphires, just tumbling onto the table, glittering in the candlelight.
And just like that, nobody's confused anymore.
Nope. The guests realize 2 things. 1, these are definitely the Polos. And 2, they have been somewhere absolutely incredible.
They'd been to Cathay, what we now call China, and that pile of gems on the table.
That's the spark. That's the moment that makes everyone else in Europe go, I want some of that.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a whole stack of research on the expansion of trade during the Renaissance. But we're not just talking about, shipping boxes.
No, we're talking about how the simple act of buying and selling things completely rewired, the history of the world.
And we're designing this deep dive specifically for our grade 8 listeners who are learning English, so our mission today is pretty clear.
Yeah, we want to help you understand 3 main things. First, why did people start trading so much more? Second, why did Italy become the sort of center of the business world?
And third, how are all these new business ideas like banks actually invented?
So before we dive in, let's just quickly define 2 words we're going to be using a lot. First one is trade.
Right. When we say trade, all we mean is buying and selling stuff. I have a pencil, you have a dollar, we swap. That's trade.
Simple. And the second word is merchant. A merchant is just the professional person who does all that buying and selling to make a profit.
Okay, simple enough. So let's get back to Marco Polo and that pile of rubies. Why was his story such a huge deal?
Well, he didn't just bring back gems, he wrote a book about it. And it was a phenomenon. I mean, it was like the Harry Potter of the 1300s. Everyone read it.
And in it, he described his travels along the Silk Road.
Right. Now, we should be careful with that term.
Yeah, when I first heard Silk Road, I honestly pictured like a nice paved highway made of actual silk.
That would be comfortable. But no, the Silk Road wasn't one single road, and it was definitely not paved.
So what was it?
It was this huge, messy network of different routes. You know, desert paths, mountain passes, dirt tracks. It connected the Mediterranean in the west all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the east.
And here's where the research makes a really important point. The most valuable thing moving on that road wasn't the silk.
Not even the gems. This is our first key idea for you. The most valuable thing being traded was ideas.
We call that intercultural contact.
Exactly. When a merchant from Italy meets a merchant from China, they don't just trade goods, they trade stories. They talk about science, religion, technology.
So Marco Polo didn't just bring back diamonds, he brought back a new worldview. He showed Europe that they weren't the center of the universe.
That there were these massive advanced civilizations out there that they knew absolutely nothing about. But here's where the story gets a bit more complicated.
Okay.
Marco Polo is like the friendly face of trade. But the research suggests that the real engine that kicked all of this off wasn't an adventure, it was a war.
It usually is. We're talking about the Crusades. And that seems backward to me. War normally destroys trade.
In short term, you're right. But think long term. The Crusades were these huge religious wars, starting around 1095. You had Christian armies from Europe traveling thousands of kilometers to the Middle East.
To fight Muslims over control of the Holy Land.
It was violent, it was messy. But what it also meant was you had thousands of European men suddenly living in a completely foreign land.
And they realized something.
They realized that the enemy lived better than they did. You have to remember, in the 1100s, the Muslim world was way more advanced than Europe. They had better medicine, better astronomy.
Cleaner cities, better food.
So these soldiers are over there fighting, but they're also eating new fruits, using new oils and perfumes,
Right.
and they are tasting spices.
Spices are the big one.
This is the gateway good. When those soldiers finally went home to, cold, muddy France or England, they missed the flavor. They didn't want bland stew anymore. They wanted cinnamon and nutmeg and pepper.
Okay, let's pause on spices. Because for us today, it's hard to get. I can buy pepper for a couple of bucks. Why was it worth more than its weight in gold back then?
That's a great question. Taste was part of it, for sure, but it was mostly about two things: survival and smell.
Survival.
Yeah, no refrigerators. So if you butcher an animal in the fall, you need that meat to last all winter. Spices help preserve it, and maybe more importantly, they covered up the taste if it was starting to go bad.
Gross, but practical.
And the second reason is even more basic: personal hygiene.
Uh-oh.
Let's just say people in the Middle Ages didn't shower a lot. There was no deodorant.
Everyone smelled terrible.
Everyone smelled awful. Spices and perfumes were pretty much the only way to make a room tolerable. So when you controlled the spice trade, you weren't just selling flavor, you were selling the ability to stand being near other people.
That is a very powerful product. So the Crusades create this huge demand. Europe wants the goods. Who's going to get them?
And that brings us to our second big question. Why Italy?
If you look at a map,
The answer is just staring you in the face. Geography is destiny.
Italy is that big boot shape, kicking right into the middle of the Mediterranean Sea.
It's basically a giant pier sticking out of Europe, pointing towards the east. So if you're a ship coming from North Africa or the Middle East, Italy is your first and easiest stop. It's much cheaper than sailing all the way around to England.
So they had the perfect location, but the research mentions the climate too.
Right. Think about Northern Europe, like Germany. In the winter, rivers freeze, roads turn to mud, trade just stops. But in Italy, the climate's mild. You can trade all year round.
And the land itself was producing valuable goods like olives for oil and grapes for wine.
They had a huge head start just by being where they were.
But it wasn't just geographical luck, was it? The sources say the politics were totally different.
This is a really crucial point. Most of Europe was feudal. You had a big kingdom like France with a king at the top. The king owned all the land, nobles managed it, peasants worked it.
A very rigid pyramid structure.
It's super rigid. But Italy wasn't like that. Italy was a collection of city-states.
Let's define that. What's a city-state?
Okay, imagine if a major city today, like say Toronto or Los Angeles, just decided we're not part of the country anymore.
We're our own country now.
We have our own army, our own money, our own laws. That's a city-state.
And they controlled the farmland around them too, the hinterland.
Yep, the hinterland is just the rural area that provides food for the city. So instead of one king of Italy, you have the Republic of Venice, the Republic of Genoa, Florence, all independent.
And all competing with each other.
Fiercely. It was like a sports league where the teams had armies. And because there was no king, the whole social structure was different. In France, power came from owning land. In Italy, power came from having money.
So even the nobles moved into the cities and became businessmen.
Exactly. The fastest way to get power was to get rich. And that created a society that was just laser focused on business.
Let's talk about the two big rivals mentioned in the text, Venice and Genoa. It's like Apple versus Microsoft, but with ships.
That's a great way to put it. Venice was the maritime superpower. It was built on islands, so it was almost impossible to attack.
And they focused on the trade routes to the east, right? The Silk Road.
Yep. And they had the arsenal.
Which sounds like a weapon, but it was a place.
This is the first real factory in history, a massive shipyard. They had an assembly line system and could build a fully equipped warship in a single day.
A single day? That's incredible.
Unheard of at the time. Then on the other side of Italy, you have Genoa.
They control the west, trade with Spain, France.
Right. But you can't have two superpowers in one small sea without conflict. They were constantly at war.
And the research mentions the Battle of Chioggia in 1380.
A really nasty war. But Venice won. They basically crushed Genoa and became the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean.
Okay, so we know why trade grew and where it was centered. Now let's get into the how, because moving goods in 1350 was not easy.
Not at all. It was a nightmare. You basically had two options, water or land. Water was always better, always cheaper. A ship can carry tons, but overland.
You're using mules or oxen. It's slow, it's expensive. You can't carry very much.
The research here actually draws a really cool parallel for our Canadian students. It compares these trade routes to the First Nations trade networks in North America.
That's a great connection.
It is. Just like the Europeans used the Mediterranean, indigenous peoples used the river systems. The source specifically mentions Cree Burn Lake in what's now Alberta.
What was that?
It was a hub, a meeting place. The Cree and Dean peoples would travel there to trade goods, share news, and gather resources, especially tar, to waterproof their canoes.
It just shows that trade is this universal human thing. But as European trade got bigger, the business itself had to change. The sources talk about a big shift in business models.
Yeah, this is basically the shift from the Middle Ages to the modern world. Let's call it Model A versus Model B. Model A is the guild system.
The old way.
The old way. If you're a shoemaker, you belong to the shoemaker's guild, you make the entire shoe yourself, your goal is quality, and you charge a fair price.
Fair price sounds nice.
It was an ethical system. The church taught that getting too rich was a sin. You just made enough to support your family. It was about stability.
Okay, so what's Model B?
Model B is the merchant model.
Yeah.
And it's about one thing: profit. The merchant doesn't make the shoe. He buys the leather cheap from one guy, pays another person a low wage to cut it, pays someone else an even lower wage to stitch it.
And then sells the final product for the highest price he can get.
That sounds...
Very familiar.
It's the birth of capitalism.
Yeah.
And not everyone was happy about it. The workers got squeezed. The source mentions a big revolt in Florence, the Ciampi revolt. They were the wool carders, the guys doing the dirtiest, lowest paid job in the whole wool industry. They had no rights. They couldn't form a guild. And in 1378, they just snapped. They rioted and actually took over the government of Florence for a few weeks.
Wow. It's a good reminder that when you have all this new wealth being created, you usually have huge inequality too. But for the merchants to manage this wealth, they needed new tools. Right, you can't just lug chests of gold coins over the mountains, it's too dangerous.
You'd get robbed by bandits or pirates. So, the Italians basically invented the financial system, but first, they had to get past a major obstacle: the church.
We need to talk about usury. That's U-S-U-R-Y.
Right. Usury is just charging interest on a loan. Today, that's just banking.
It's completely normal.
But back then, the Catholic Church said it was a mortal sin. It was literally a crime against God to make money just by lending money.
So how did they get around that? I mean, trade needs loans. You need money up front to build a ship.
They found a loophole. The loophole was risk. The church eventually agreed that if your loan was for a risky sea voyage, well, the ship might sink. You might lose all your money.
So the extra charge wasn't interest.
It was an insurance premium to cover the risk. And once that door was open, banking just flooded through.
And they invented some brilliant tools. The bill of exchange is my favorite.
It's genius. So imagine you're a merchant in Florence and you need to buy wool in London. Instead of carrying a bag of gold, you go to a bank in Florence, say, the Medici Bank.
You give them your gold.
And they give you a piece of paper, a bill of exchange.
Like a modern check.
Exactly. You can hide that paper in your boot, ride to London, walk into the Medici branch there, and they'll give you your money in the local currency.
So much safer. And it meant money could move faster than people.
It greased the wheels of the entire European economy.
And we can't talk about banking without talking about the family you just mentioned, the Medici.
The godfathers of the Renaissance. The Medici family of Florence is the ultimate case study in how trade turns into political power.
They started in the wool trade, right?
They did, but they quickly realized the real money wasn't in the wool itself. It was in handling the money for everyone else selling wool. They became the Pope's bankers, which gave them incredible power.
And we have two main characters here, Cosimo and Lorenzo.
Cosimo de' Medici was the grandfather, the architect. He understood that in Florence, money was power. The city was technically a republic, a democracy.
But Cosimo basically owned it.
He ruled from the shadows. He'd pay off officials, bail out his friends, and have his enemies exiled from the city. He didn't need a crown when he had a ledger book.
And then his grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent.
He's the one who made the Renaissance look like the Renaissance. He was a huge patron of the arts.
Patronage. That's when a rich person pays an artist to create things.
Exactly. And Lorenzo had an amazing eye for talent. He took a teenage Michelangelo into his own home. He supported Leonardo da Vinci. He poured the family's fortune into making Florence the most beautiful city in the world.
But why? Was he just a nice guy who liked art?
That was probably part of it. But remember that whole usury thing? Making money from interest was still seen as kind of dirty. Many of these wealthy bankers felt guilty.
They were worried about going to hell.
So spending huge amounts of money on art and building beautiful churches was a way to, clean their reputation and maybe their souls.
That's fascinating. So the beauty of the Renaissance was partly funded by guilty bankers.
It's a complicated legacy and a very dangerous one. The source material has a list of Medici deaths. It reads like a script from a horror movie.
I'm looking at it now. 1478, Giuliano de' Medici stabbed to death during a church service.
In cathedral, yeah.
1535, Ippolito, poisoned. 1576, Isabella, strangled.
Just shows the stakes were life and death. This wasn't just business, it was a war for control.
But despite all the violence, the wealth did something amazing. The sources say that after the Black Death, the economy actually slowed down. There was a depression.
Which seems weird, right? A depression helping the arts.
How does that work?
Because there were fewer good business investments to be made. Which families like the Medici had all this cash just sitting around? So instead of investing in more ships, they invested in culture, they invested in beauty, because they couldn't invest in growth.
Okay, let's bring this all together for our listeners. We promised to explain how trade built the Renaissance. Can we walk through that chain reaction?
Let's do it in 5 steps. Step 1. The Crusades and Marco Polo's travels create a huge demand in Europe for luxury goods from the East.
Step 2. Italy's geography makes it the perfect gateway for all those goods to enter Europe.
Step 3. The Italian city-states get incredibly rich and competitive, breaking away from the old, rigid feudal system.
Step 4. To manage all this new money, they invent the tools of capitalism. Banking, interest, bills of exchange.
And step 5. That massive pile of wealth is then used by families like the Medici to pay for the art and science that we now call the Renaissance.
It connects everything. The art didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was paid for by the spice trade.
And the biggest takeaway, I think, is that trade didn't just move pepper and silk. It moved ideas. By doing business with the world, Europe learned from the world. It sparked the drive to catch up.
That's a great way to put it. It's about being open to the outside world. Now, before we finish, we have a question for you to think about. We've seen how a desire for something as simple as pepper completely changed the world in the 1300s.
So here's the question. What is the spice of today? What is the one thing we're trading right now that is reshaping our world for the next 500 years?
Is it oil? Is it microchips? Is it our personal data?
What is the thing that in the year 2500, students will be studying and saying, that trade right there, that's what built the 21st century?
It's something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you learned some new things and saw a piece of history in a new light.
Keep asking questions.
We'll see you next time.